The heavy oak doors of the Philadelphia courthouse loomed before me, their dark, polished surfaces reflecting my own anxious yet determined posture. For 30 years, I had built Gibson and Associates from scratch. One client, one late night, one relentless negotiation at a time. Every call I answered, every spreadsheet I painstakingly balanced, every tiny victory added brick by brick to the life I had built. And now the very people I had loved most, my own daughter and her husband, stood on the opposite side of a courtroom, demanding not just a piece of it, but all of it. My life, my house, my company. They wanted everything. The air inside was thick with anticipation. My briefcase was light, almost symbolic compared to the weight in my chest. The courtroom was a grand chamber with high ceilings, the sound of footsteps echoing against marble floors. Journalists had been kept at bay, but I could feel the tension. I could sense the electric charge of betrayal that seemed to hang invisibly between the polished walls and mahogany benches. Eunice, my daughter, sat poised, perfectly composed beside Stuart. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her posture formal, her expression unreadable. She was 36 now, but I still saw the little girl who had run around my first tiny office above the dry cleaner, helping me organize files and learning what it meant to be part of a family and part of something bigger. Stuart, her husband, exuded confidence, the kind that could easily be mistaken for authority. Both of them had lawyers by their sides, stacks of documents, financial projections, and the cold steel of strategy in their eyes. The judge, an old friend from decades past, was presiding. The familiarity that once made me trust him now made my stomach twist. I had known Judge Morrison since my first years as a fledgling attorney. We had shared dinners, argued cases together in the halls of law, and even celebrated personal milestones. Today, though, that friendship seemed like a distant memory. His eyes scanned the documents in front of him with a detached, almost bored expression, and when he looked up at me, a faint smirk curled his lips. "Mr. Gibson," he said slowly, as if savoring the moment, "are you truly attempting to defend the indefensible? You stand here, believing that family is somehow a shield against legal obligation, against what is fair and just. Naive, almost foolish, if I may say so." A murmur ran through the room. I could feel the eyes of spectators, clerks, and attorneys alike pressing against me. For a moment I considered lowering my head, accepting the humiliation. But then something within me hardened. Not anger, not fear, something colder, sharper, like clarity itself. I spoke slowly, deliberately, my voice calm, but carrying an authority that silenced the room immediately. "Your Honor," I said, "you may believe I am naive, that I am a fool, but the truth is I have built something with love, with sweat, with integrity, and I will not let greed blind us to what is right." The judge froze, his pen hovering over the bench. I could see the color drain from his face, the confidence slipping ever so slightly. Eunice's lips pressed together tightly, and Stuart's eyes narrowed. The sudden silence that fell over the courtroom was thick, almost tangible, as if the air itself held its breath. I continued, each word deliberate. "I have spent 30 years creating Gibson and Associates from nothing. It is not just a business, it is a legacy. And today I am making a choice. A choice to trust my daughter, a choice to honor the years we spent together. Building something meaningful. 40% of the firm, over $300,000 in equity, will be hers, freely given. Not because she demanded it, not because I am compelled, but because she has earned it." I could see the shock ripple across the room. My own daughter's face betrayed the first hint of confusion, perhaps even doubt, about what was about to unfold. Her husband's jaw tightened. The tension radiated outward. The murmurs of the courtroom staff were swallowed by the gravity of my statement. I took a breath, the weight of the past decades pressing down on me, yet balanced by a sense of calm pride. I thought of the nights spent drafting contracts, of the first clients who trusted me, of the countless moments when I had sacrificed sleep, health, and personal comfort to ensure the firm not only survived but thrived. And here in this grand chamber, I was giving a piece of it to the one person who, in my heart, deserved it most. The notary, Mrs. Chen, a pleasant woman with a warm smile, was ready with the documents. Her eyes met mine, acknowledging silently the significance of the moment. "Congratulations, Mr. Gibson," she said softly, stamping the final page. "This is quite a generous gift." Generous, yes, but not because of monetary value. Generous because it was an act of faith, of love, of family. I glanced at Eunice, now seated stiffly beside Stuart. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a trace of the little girl who had once looked up to me. She reached across briefly, a fleeting touch on my hand that sent a small jolt of warmth through me. "Family comes first," I told Mrs. Chen, almost as if reminding myself. "Always has, always will." The papers slid smoothly into the leather portfolio, the weight of them satisfying in my hands. $300,000 in equity, a tangible reward for years of dedication. My thoughts lingered on Eunice. 12 years working beside me, managing accounts, nurturing client relationships, and building the firm's reputation. She had earned this, I told myself, and she deserved nothing less. Stuart leaned forward, shaking my hand firmly. "We won't forget this, Hyman, I promise." I nodded, feeling a swell of emotion that was hard to name. Pride, perhaps, or relief, or something even closer to joy. This moment, carefully imagined and anticipated for months, had arrived. And despite the storm of legal threats and family tension, I felt grounded in a truth I could not deny. I had done what I believed was right. The courtroom seemed to shrink around me, the echo of murmurs fading into the background. Outside, Philadelphia's streets were busy as always, but here in this sacred space, a personal victory had quietly unfolded. I had extended a hand, offered trust, and honored love. And that, in my eyes, was more valuable than any judgment, any verdict, any paper signed in haste. I rose from my seat, gathering the portfolio carefully. My hands were steady now, no tremor of fear, only the satisfaction of a man who had acted according to his conscience. The courtroom, the judge, the opposing counsel, all of it had witnessed something rare. A father giving freely without hesitation to the daughter he had always cherished. And as we exited the courtroom, the spring sun cutting through the gray of March, I carried with me a quiet certainty. The fight in court had ended, for now. The real test, the proof of loyalty, love, and family, was still ahead. In the moments, in the choices, and in the hearts of those I had trusted most. The courthouse doors closed behind us with a heavy thud, leaving the scent of polished wood and stale paper lingering in the air. Outside, the March sun bathed the city in a soft golden glow, a quiet contrast to the tension that had gripped me just minutes ago. I adjusted my tie and inhaled deeply, letting the crisp spring air fill my lungs. 30 years of building Gibson and Associates, 30 years of sacrifice and relentless work, and now a gesture that I hoped would honor all of it. 40% of the firm, over $300,000 in equity, given freely to my daughter, Eunice, and her husband, Stuart. We walked together to the waiting car, the leather seats soft beneath us. Stuart's hand rested casually on his knee, but there was a glint in his eye that I did not quite understand. Eunice's gaze was steady, her expression calm, though I thought I detected a flicker of emotion as she glanced at me. I reminded myself that I had always believed in her integrity, and that this was an act of love, not transaction. The ride to Mrs. Chen's office was quiet, the hum of the engine filling the space between us. I allowed my mind to wander, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The firm had started as a tiny office above a dry cleaner, with one flickering fluorescent light and a stack of files taller than me. Eunice, only a young girl at the time, had helped me sort those files, learning the language of accounting and the subtleties of client relations. She had grown into a formidable woman, competent, meticulous, and resourceful. Giving her a share of the company was not just fair, it was overdue. Mrs. Chen's office was warm and inviting, a sharp contrast to the cold, imposing atmosphere of the courthouse. The mahogany desk gleamed under the soft light, and the smell of fresh flowers lingered in the air. Mrs. Chen herself was a picture of calm efficiency, her silver hair pinned neatly, a gentle smile playing at her lips. "Mr. Gibson," she said, gesturing for me to sit, "we prepared the final documents. Once signed, the transfer will be complete. Are you ready?" I nodded, sliding the leather portfolio across the desk. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. This was a tremor of anticipation, of pride, of something almost sacred. I lifted the pen, feeling its weight in my hand, and took a moment to look at the first page of the document. My name, Hyman Gibson, was printed clearly, every word a testament to decades of work, trust, and love. I looked up at Eunice. She was smiling faintly now, her fingers brushing against the edge of the portfolio. "Daddy," she whispered, almost too softly for me to hear. This is really happening." Her voice, warm and familiar, made my chest swell. This was the moment I had envisioned countless times, standing at the crossroads of legacy and family, choosing to honor the bond that I had always cherished. "Yes, and Eunice," I replied, my voice steady. "You've earned this, every bit of it." Stuart leaned forward, his expression unreadable. But I noticed the slight tension in his jaw. He was a strategist, a negotiator, always calculating. I had known from the start that the act of giving freely would be scrutinized, dissected, even questioned. Yet I continued, focusing on what mattered, my daughter, my family, and the integrity of my gesture. I signed the first page. The pen scratched across the paper, and I felt a strange sense of ceremony in the simple act. Page by page, the documents passed beneath my hand. Each signature was a reaffirmation of my trust, a promise that family could matter more than greed. Mrs. Chen observed silently, her stamp poised to finalize the transaction once I was done. "Congratulations, Mr. Gibson," she said after the final page was signed, the stamp hitting the paper with a satisfying thud. "This is quite a generous gift. Few would have the foresight or the heart to do what you have done." I allowed myself a brief smile, glancing at Eunice. She reached across, her hand warm against mine. "Thank you, Daddy," she said again, "for everything." The leather portfolio felt substantial in my hands as I closed it. $300,000 in equity, a tangible acknowledgement of her hard work, her loyalty, and the years she had dedicated to building the firm alongside me. But more than that, it represented trust, a father's trust in his daughter. As we left Mrs. Chen's office, I suggested lunch at a nearby cafe, wanting to savor the moment, to extend the small window of peace that had settled over us. We sat by the window, sunlight streaming in, and I reflected quietly. Over 12 years, Eunice had been more than an employee. She had been a partner, a confidant, a link between the humble beginnings of the firm and its current standing. I had never measured her contributions in mere numbers, yet today the numbers reflected what I had always known. She had earned everything she received. Stuart was quiet, observing me, his hands folded neatly on the table. I sensed a mixture of respect and calculation in his demeanor, and I reminded myself that this was not about him. It was about my daughter, about righting the subtle injustices of the past, about acknowledging the sacrifices she had made without complaint. After lunch, I drove them to my home in Chestnut Hill, a modest 3-bedroom colonial I had purchased 15 years ago. The sunlight bounced off the brick facade, highlighting the flower boxes I had tended for years, the warm hues of the windows catching the late afternoon light. I felt a surge of contentment, knowing that this evening would be special. I had planned a celebratory dinner, my way of marking the transition, a private acknowledgement of the bond I still hoped would endure. The kitchen smelled of herbs and roasting chicken as I finished preparing the meal. Garlic potatoes sizzled in the oven, a salad with pecans and cranberries waited, and a bottle of California Chardonnay rested on the sideboard, breathing gently. I set the table with care, imagining the smiles, the laughter, the shared stories that would accompany the first meal of this new chapter. When they arrived, Stuart's eyes lit up at the spread. "You've outdone yourself," he said, surveying the table with admiration. Eunice, however, sat quietly, her smile faint but unmistakably present. I poured the wine, my hand steady, feeling a sense of completion I had not experienced in years. "To family," I said, raising my glass. "To the future." "To what we deserve," Stuart echoed. We drank, the wine smooth, the air filled with a tentative warmth. For a moment it felt as though the past 12 years, the challenges, the long hours, the struggles of building a business, were crystallized into this simple gesture of togetherness. I thought of the late nights, of teaching Anunais how to negotiate contracts, how to manage clients, how to value integrity above profit. All of it had led to this moment, and I felt a quiet satisfaction, a reassurance that I had done right. I began discussing the transition, suggesting a formal schedule to review client portfolios, to ensure Eunice and Stewart felt comfortable managing 40% of the firm. My voice was calm, measured, carrying the confidence of experience. Yet as I spoke, I noticed a subtle shift in Eunice's expression, a tension that had not been there before. Her gaze hardened, her tone became flat, and I realized too late that the peaceful afternoon I had envisioned was about to fracture. "What?" I asked quietly, unsure if I had misheard. 40%? She repeated, her voice sharper now. "That's what you think I'm worth?" The fork in my hand paused halfway to my mouth. My stomach tightened. I opened my mouth to explain, to reassure her that this was not just fair, it was generous. But the words caught somewhere between conviction and confusion. A chill ran through the room, subtle but undeniable. I looked at Stewart, whose face had grown hard, his posture suddenly threatening. I felt a wave of unease, the first hint of a storm I had not anticipated. My daughter, the girl I had nurtured and trusted, was questioning my judgment, my intentions, and perhaps my very love. And in that moment, I realized that the gift I had thought would unite us might instead become the spark that ignites a conflict I was not yet prepared to face. The drive to Chestnut Hill was quiet, almost contemplative. The March sun glinted off the rooftops, warming the leather of the car seats. But inside, my mind was elsewhere. I replayed the courthouse, the notary's office, the signatures on the documents, and the faint warmth of Eunice's hand in mine. For months, I had imagined this moment, the culmination of decades of work, the transfer of 40% of Gibson and Associates to my daughter, a tangible acknowledgement of her efforts and my trust. Yet now, as we drove, I sensed an undercurrent I hadn't anticipated. Stewart's eyes were on the road, sharp, calculating, while Eunice sat beside him, silent, her fingers lightly tapping on her knees. I tried to read her expression, searching for the same warmth I had felt at Mrs. Chen's office, but it was muted, distant, almost cold. "Shall we stop somewhere for coffee before we head in?" I asked, trying to break the tension. Stewart's eyes flicked toward me briefly. "No, that won't be necessary, Mom," he said. His tone was polite, but clipped. Eunice gave a small nod, her eyes fixed on the passing cityscape. I reminded myself that perhaps the gravity of the gift, the significance of the day, had left them contemplative. By the time we pulled into the driveway of my home, a modest 3-bedroom colonial I had purchased 15 years ago, I felt a sense of pride. The bricks glowed softly in the late afternoon sun. Flower boxes rested neatly beneath the windows, and the faint scent of the garden carried on the breeze. This house, modest by some standards, had always been a home first, a place of warmth, security, and family. I had spent years making it so. The interior was just as I had left it, a careful balance of comfort and elegance. My kitchen smelled of roasted herbs, garlic, and the faint sweetness of cranberries in the salad. The table was set with precision, wine glasses polished, plates gleaming, and a bottle of California Chardonnay resting on the sideboard. I had planned this dinner carefully, a celebration of trust, legacy, and love. I wanted this to be a moment where family came first, a memory that would endure beyond contracts and legal documents. Stewart's eyes scanned the table with approval. "You've outdone yourself," he said, nodding at the spread. He seemed genuinely impressed, which gave me a brief, fleeting satisfaction. Eunice, however, remained silent, her eyes wandering around the room. She did not immediately smile, though a faint curve of her lips suggested recognition of the effort I had put into the evening. I poured the wine, my hand steady. The Chardonnay caught the light as it flowed into the glasses, golden and smooth. "To family," I said, raising my glass. "To the future." "To what we deserve," Stewart echoed, clinking his glass against mine. His smile was firm, practiced. Eunice took her glass with a quiet nod, a warmth that reminded me of her younger self, the girl who had once helped me organize files in that tiny office above the dry cleaner. I felt a surge of pride and love, the kind of deep satisfaction that comes from seeing someone you've nurtured succeed. We began to eat, the roasted chicken tender, the garlic potatoes fragrant, the salad crisp and balanced. I spoke of the transition, suggesting we review the client portfolios together over the coming weeks to ensure that Eunice felt confident managing 40% of the firm. My voice was calm, reassuring, carrying the authority of experience and the confidence of fairness. But then, her voice cut through the gentle rhythm of the evening, sharper than I expected. "What?" I asked, slightly startled. 40%, she said, her tone colder now. "That's what you think I'm worth?" I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, and tried to measure my response. My heart thumped, not with fear, but with the sudden weight of confusion. "Ununice, it's a gift," I began carefully, hoping to convey the sincerity behind my actions. "Over $300,000 in equity. You've worked for 12 years alongside me. You've earned it. This is not about measurement. It's about trust, love, and your contribution." Stewart's voice cut in, firm, deliberate, full of accusation. "A gift? You've been exploiting your daughter for 12 years? The word hit me like a slap. "Exploiting? Eunice? You know that's not true," I said, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts. "I paid you well. $95,000 a year, plus bonuses, far above market rate for the role you held." "Yes," Stewart said, pushing his chair back with a scraping sound that made the room feel smaller, colder. $95,000 a year while you got rich off her sweat, her time, her loyalty? Pennies. That's all it was." Aunt Eunice's gaze was fixed on her wine glass, rotating it slowly. Her eyes didn't meet mine. She didn't touch my hand. The warmth I had felt at the notary's office had evaporated. It was replaced with a chilling, calculated distance. "I don't understand," I whispered, quiet, almost pleading. "I gave you everything. I trusted you. I honored you." "You owed it to me," Aunt Eunice said finally, her voice cold as ice, devoid of the familiarity of the daughter I knew. "And now, we're collecting." Stewart rose from his seat, towering above me, his presence suddenly dominating the room. "Here's what's happening, old man," he said. His tone left no room for negotiation, no room for doubt. "You transfer everything, the house, the remaining 60% of the firm, or we take you to court. Your choice." I felt the room tilt slightly, though I knew it was me, not the walls, swaying under the weight of betrayal. My own daughter, the girl I had nurtured, was standing with him. She met my eyes finally, and the expression I saw was not recognition, not warmth, not love, but resolve. "I should have done this years ago," she said. "Done what?" I asked, struggling to comprehend the words. "I've given you everything," I said softly, my hands gripping the table. "A job, security, respect." "You gave us scraps," Aunt Eunice interrupted, her tone sharp. "Now we're taking what's ours." Stewart's hand was already on the doorknob. "We want the house. We want the remaining 60%. You have 1 week to think about it, but we both know how this ends. Either you hand it over, or we make you look like the exploitative father you are." In court. The door opened, and the cold draft of reality swept into the dining room. Aunt Eunice rose, leaving her napkin crumpled on the table. She didn't look back as she followed Stewart out, leaving me alone. The house settled into silence. My hands, once steady, now trembled slightly. The leather portfolio lay beside my plate, the documents I had signed with love and pride, now feeling like a down payment on betrayal. My celebratory dinner grew cold. The wine, once smooth and comforting, now tasted faintly bitter on my tongue. The echoes of Stewart's words lingered in the room. "Old man, see you in court." And in that silence, I realized that what I had believed to be a moment of joy and family connection had become the opening act of a battle I had never anticipated. The peaceful afternoon, the carefully prepared dinner, the generous gift, it had all been twisted, misinterpreted, weaponized against me. I sat back, staring at the empty chairs, the crumpled napkin, the untouched plates. For the first time in decades, I felt truly alone, even in the house I had built with love and care. The warmth, the pride, the satisfaction of having done right by my daughter, it was gone, replaced by the cold reality of betrayal, manipulation, and a legal war I was now thrust into. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet, simmering determination began to rise. If they thought they could break me with threats and greed, they were mistaken. But for now, I allowed myself a moment of grief, a moment to absorb the weight of the shock. The fight was just beginning. The house fell into a silence so complete that it pressed against my ears, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The late afternoon sun streamed weakly through the windows, but its warmth did not reach me. The chairs were empty, the napkin crumpled, and the dinner I had so carefully prepared now sat cold on the table. My hands rested on the leather portfolio, the documents inside representing not just equity and ownership, but years of trust, sacrifice, and love. And yet, in that moment, they felt like a trap, a cruel reminder of how quickly affection can be twisted into accusation. I rose slowly, moving to the window and watching Stuart and Eunice walk down the driveway. Their posture was composed, almost deliberate, as if the walk itself carried the authority of a verdict. I wanted to call out, to demand an explanation, to remind them of the years we had shared, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say that would undo the cold certainty in their eyes? The room smelled faintly of roasted chicken, a smell that once brought comfort, now turning sour in my mind. I walked to the kitchen, running my fingers along the counter, trying to ground myself in the physicality of my home, in the reality that had once been a sanctuary. Every detail, the polished plates, the wine glasses, the careful arrangement of utensils, was a testament to preparation, thoughtfulness, and love. And yet it felt irrelevant. They had reduced it to nothing more than a backdrop for their demands. I sat down at the table, letting my head fall into my hands. 40% of the company, given freely, with love and pride. How could that generosity be interpreted as a down payment on coercion? How had the daughter I once held as my heart's pride become a stranger capable of weaponizing my own care? The words Stuart had spoken still echoed in my mind, each syllable heavy with accusation. Old man, see you in court. I remembered the courthouse earlier that day, the judge's smirk, the murmurs of the room, the way Eunice had squeezed my hand at Mrs. Chen's office. At the time, I had felt warmth, connection, a sense that family could transcend legal threats and material disputes. Now that memory felt like a cruel trick, a fleeting illusion that had evaporated as soon as the fork had hovered near my mouth. The phone in the cup holder remained silent, a quiet companion to the storm inside me. No calls from clients, no emergencies, no reminders of the world beyond this betrayal, just the oppressive weight of solitude and the sharp sting of trust betrayed. I picked up the leather portfolio, flipping through the signed pages with a trembling hand. Each signature, once a symbol of pride, now seemed almost ceremonial, a record of generosity misinterpreted as weakness. I thought back to the first days of Gibson and Associates, the tiny office above the dry cleaner, the stacks of files taller than me, the flickering fluorescent light. Eunice had been there, a curious girl helping me organize papers and learning, perhaps without knowing it, what it meant to build something meaningful. I had taught her about integrity, dedication, and respect. Had I been naive to believe that these lessons would endure? That she would see the gift I had given as an expression of love, rather than an obligation unfulfilled? The room seemed colder now, the shadows lengthening across the floor as evening approached. I poured myself a glass of the leftover Chardonnay, the smooth golden liquid offering a small, bitter comfort. I swirled it in the glass, watching the light catch and refract, and allowed myself to breathe slowly, counting the seconds, trying to calm the rising tide of emotions. A legal battle was inevitable. Stuart had made that clear. The remaining 60% of the company, the house, my life's work, they would demand it all, and they would use the courtroom as their weapon. I had faced tough negotiations, ruthless competitors, and complex legal battles before, But this was different. This was intimate, personal. The betrayal cut deeper because it came from the very people I had loved most. I opened my laptop, scanning through emails and messages that had accumulated over the day. Legal notices, client inquiries, routine communications. All of them now seemed trivial compared to the monumental challenge before me. My mind raced, cataloging strategies, imagining defenses, anticipating accusations. I could feel the weight of my own legacy pressing down on me, demanding that I respond not just as a businessman, but as a father whose trust had been shattered. For hours, I sat in the silence of my home, the only sounds the occasional creak of the floorboards and the faint hum of the refrigerator. My thoughts turned inward, reflecting on the nature of family, loyalty, and the painful reality that even the closest bonds could fracture under pressure. I had given freely, openly, without expectation, believing that love could guide decisions and sustain relationships. That belief had been my compass, my guiding principle. Now it seemed it had been a vulnerability. I remembered Eunice's voice at Mrs. Chen's office, the gentle warmth of her hand on mine, the fleeting softness in her expression. How quickly that had vanished. How a simple gesture of trust could be reinterpreted as an opportunity for exploitation. I felt a cold determination begin to take root inside me. If they believed they could manipulate my generosity, they were mistaken. If they thought they could diminish decades of effort, they were wrong. Yet for all the anger and hurt, there was also clarity. I understood now that the legal system would be their arena, that the battle ahead would not be fought in kitchens or family rooms, but in courtrooms and offices, through documents, testimonies, and arguments. I had resources, knowledge, and experience on my side. But more importantly, I had integrity, a record of decades spent building a company ethically, responsibly, and with dedication. That integrity would be my shield, my anchor in the storm to come. I finally rose from the table, the glass of wine forgotten. The portfolio was heavy in my hands, but it was also a symbol of what I had accomplished. It reminded me that while betrayal could wound, it could not erase achievement. I moved to the window again, looking out at the quiet neighborhood, the sun dipping toward the horizon. My home was still mine for now, a fortress of memory, effort, and love. I began making plans, drafting mental outlines of legal strategies, reviewing potential arguments, anticipating their moves. Every step they had taken, every tone of accusation, every word of cold calculation was now a piece of information to be used in the defense of what was rightfully mine. I would not be intimidated, and I would not surrender my life's work lightly. As night fell, the shadows deepened, and I felt the weight of isolation settle over me. Yet in that same darkness, there was a spark, a stubborn, unyielding resolve. Betrayal might have fractured trust, but it had not shattered purpose. The fight was far from over, and I would face it with the same dedication, intelligence, and perseverance that had built Gibson and Associates from nothing. I poured another glass of wine, letting the liquid flow smoothly, and raised it silently to the empty chairs around the table. To clarity, I whispered, to justice, to what is right. The house was quiet. The documents lay ready, the plans were forming, and the storm of betrayal waited outside my walls. I knew the coming days would be difficult, perhaps even devastating, but I also knew one unshakable truth. I would not go down without standing for what I had built, for the integrity of my life's work, and for the principle that family, though fragile, could not be so easily corrupted. And so, in the solitude of my home, the battle lines were drawn, the players revealed, and the first steps toward justice, retribution, and perhaps reconciliation began to take shape. The calm before the storm had passed. The fight for Gibson and Associates and the truth about loyalty and betrayal was only beginning. The courtroom was colder than I remembered. The walls, once a symbol of authority and justice, now seemed like the cage of inevitability. Outside, the city moved on in its usual rhythm, oblivious to the private war unfolding within these marble walls. Inside, every chair, every echo, every glance felt heavy, pregnant with anticipation. Today, I was not just defending Gibson and Associates. I was defending 30 years of trust, integrity, and the bond I had believed existed with my daughter. Eunice and Stuart were already seated. Their posture was deliberate, controlled, practiced. They had rehearsed every glance, every expression. Eunice's eyes were cold, sharpened by the strategy of her husband, her voice now a weapon rather than a warm echo of the girl who had once run through my first tiny office. Stuart's presence radiated authority, the kind that demanded compliance. They were poised to take everything, my home, my company, my legacy, and they believed it was their right. The judge, Judge Morrison, presided with the same detached formality he had shown when I first appeared in court, the day of the initial filings. He seemed to take quiet pleasure in the tension, though today I could see the faint tremor of recognition in his eyes. Recognition that I was not the same man who had once been dismissed as naive, that I had fought, built, and endured far more than anyone could imagine. My lawyer, a sharp-minded woman named Carla Reynolds, leaned toward me whispering, "Stay calm, Hyman. Focus on the facts. Focus on the evidence." I nodded, though my mind was already retracing decades. The contracts, the ledgers, the countless hours spent mentoring Eunice. The growth of the firm from a single room above a dry cleaner into a thriving company. Stuart's opening statement was measured, cold, and deliberate. He painted me as exploitative, as a father who had used my daughter's labor to enrich myself, withholding what was rightfully hers. He emphasized the salary, the long hours, the perceived lack of appreciation, framing it as abuse disguised as generosity. I listened, noting every word, every inflection. The courtroom murmurs were muted but palpable. I felt the sting, the unfairness, but I reminded myself that this was exactly why I had prepared meticulously. Evidence, documentation, witnesses, all would speak louder than his accusations. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, letting the weight of the room settle around me. I spoke deliberately, my voice calm but resonant. "Your Honor, members of the court, this case is not about exploitation. It is about decades of trust, work, and shared accomplishment. My daughter Eunice has been a partner in every sense of the word. She managed accounts, nurtured client relationships, and contributed to the growth of Gibson and Associates with dedication, intelligence, and loyalty. The 40% of the company she received was not only fair, it was overdue." Gasps from the courtroom occasionally punctuated my speech, but I continued. "The notion that generosity, mentorship, and trust could be mischaracterized as exploitation is deeply troubling. But I am here to provide clarity with records, ledgers, client reports, and testimonies. This is not a story of manipulation. It is a story of fairness, of gratitude, and of recognizing the value of one's contributions." I presented the documents meticulously. Payroll records, client accounts, performance reports, each page demonstrating the fairness of the compensation, the equity granted, and the respect afforded. I even included letters from longtime clients who had worked closely with Eunice, praising her professionalism, integrity, and the value she brought to the firm. I could see the expressions of doubt flicker across the courtroom, even on the faces of Stuart and his counsel. The walls of accusation began to crumble under the weight of fact, precision, and truth. When I finally turned to Eunice, I searched for any hint of the daughter I had known. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, I saw her hesitate, a flicker of recognition, a shadow of warmth. But the moment passed. The armor of strategy, the cold certainty, returned to her features. Yet I realized then that the battle was not solely to reclaim property or protect assets. It was to protect the dignity of truth itself, the truth that one could give freely and still be respected. Stuart's counterarguments were aggressive, full of calculated indignation. He tried to frame my generosity as coercion, my equity transfers as manipulative. He painted me as an opportunist who had held back what should have been freely hers from the beginning. But with every accusation, Carla Reynolds intercepted, presenting evidence, precedent, and testimony to dismantle each claim. Slowly, deliberately, the narrative shifted. By mid-afternoon, the courtroom was quiet except for the exchange of documents and the rhythmic cadence of legal argument. I could feel the tide turning, the perception shifting from accusation to fact. The equity transfers were voluntary, documented, witnessed, and executed with full transparency. The house had been offered freely as part of a long-term plan for family security. My intentions, once doubted, were finally validated through the meticulous record of decades. Finally, it came to the closing arguments. I rose, letting my eyes sweep the courtroom, pausing on Eunice, pausing on Stewart. "This is not a story about greed or exploitation," I said, my voice steady. "It is a story about trust, about fairness, and about the legacy of work, sacrifice, and love. The documents, the records, the testimonies, each proves what any parent knows, that honoring a child's contribution should not be twisted into accusation. We are not here to punish love. We are here to recognize it." Judge Morrison leaned forward, his expression unreadable. I held my breath as he reviewed the documents one last time. Silence filled the room. Then slowly, deliberately, he spoke. "After reviewing the evidence, the testimonies, and the documents provided by Mr. Gibson, it is the court's opinion that the transfers of equity and assets were executed freely, voluntarily, and with full disclosure. The claims of coercion and exploitation are therefore dismissed." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was tempered by exhaustion, by the weight of what had been threatened, and by the knowledge of how close trust had come to being shattered beyond repair. Eunice's shoulders slumped, and Stewart's jaw tightened. The victory they had envisioned, slipping through their fingers. The courtroom murmurs swelled, but I barely noticed. My eyes were on the portfolio at my side, on the tangible proof that integrity, patience, and truth could withstand even the closest betrayal. After the court adjourned, I walked out into the spring sunlight once more. The air felt warmer, softer, almost cleansing. The city hummed around me, oblivious to the private battles fought within its walls. My phone buzzed with messages from clients, colleagues, and friends, but I barely noticed. For the first time in weeks, I felt a calm satisfaction, the quiet acknowledgement that I had done what was right, and that justice, in its own measured way, had been served. At home, the leather portfolio rested on the desk. The documents within it represented more than ownership. They represented decades of hard work, a father's trust, and a daughter's contribution recognized appropriately. I poured a glass of wine, raised it silently to the empty chairs in the dining room, and whispered, "To truth, to family, to what is right." The betrayal had been real, the threat had been terrifying, but the resolution was sweeter for the struggle. I had faced greed, calculation, and coldness from those I loved most, and yet I had emerged with dignity intact, my integrity unshaken. The house was still mine, the company was secure, and in that moment I understood the profound truth. Love and trust could be tested, but they could not be destroyed by mere accusation. I sat back sipping the wine, letting the quiet of the evening settle over me. For 30 years I had built a legacy, and now, standing amidst the calm after the storm, I knew that legacy was not just financial. It was moral, emotional, and unbreakable. No court, no betrayal, no strategy could take that from me. The battle had ended. The lesson had been learned. And for the first time in a long while, peace, tempered with wisdom, settled comfortably around me.